Hey, economic students, Mr. Perry Ellis here, and we're going to pick up in your chapter 456 notes, the unit 2 notes, supply, demand, and equilibrium. We're going to basically pick up right around, I don't know, on my slides 19-ish, the law of supply. And so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to just jump right into it. So get out your notes, follow along, and here we go. So what we're looking at here is the law of supply. Earlier, we talked about the law of demand. I did show you a nice little video about the law of supply. And so we're going to take care of the details of the law of supply, and then we're going to combine demand and supply to create equilibrium prices. So the law of supply, first of all, the supply curve is going to end up sloping upward from left to right. The demand curve sloped downward, D for demand, downward, and that's down and to the right. And we did a lot with the demand curve earlier and last week. And so the supply curve uh, slopes upward because of the law of supply. Law of supply says the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied, ceteris paribus, and vice versa, meaning the lower the price, the lower the quantity supplied. And just like there were determinants of demand, there are also determinants of supply. So what are those things that can move or shift the demand curve one way or the other? Uh, First thing listed here is price of resources. So remember, that supply is done by the producers. Demand is done by the consumers. Demand is created by consumers. Supply is created by producers. And so if you're a producer of something, and we could just pick anything, let's say baseball bats, for example, I've used that example in class before. If you're a producer of baseball bats, price of your resources might be maybe your labor costs go up, your workers are demanding more pay, or the cost of your equipment, or probably the biggest one with baseball bats is the price of lumber. The market price of lumber might go up or might go down. And so the price of resources would be one determinant of overall supply. Technology and productivity. So a new machine gets invented, or a new process or way to make baseball bats, and I can now make them in half the time, which saves me lots of money, and therefore I can create more supply. Productivity, same thing. You know, you get more productive workers, more experienced workers, or you're able to pay workers less. Believe it or not, that would be an increase in productivity. The more output for the same price, the same wages, for example. Expectations of future prices, that of course is going to affect supply as well. So if we know that, for example, the price of baseball bats will be going up in the near future, then we are going to want to supply more and meet those higher prices, and vice versa. Number of producers. If all of a sudden, you know, there are now 2 or 3 bat manufacturers, baseball bat manufacturers in my market, then of course the supply is going to go up. Or if one of the baseball bat manufacturers goes out of business, same thing. You'd have less supply naturally. Price of related goods and services. These are things like boxes, packaging. They aren't necessarily things that go into the product themselves, but are sort of related side goods or expenses that might be related to the production of baseball bats. But also, for example, if I'm purchasing lumber to make baseball bats, and then I find out that, for example, I can make wooden furniture and make a lot more money from wooden furniture. If the price of wooden furniture goes through the roof, as a manufacturer who might already have the wood and the other capital resources to be able to just switch to making wooden furniture, those related goods might cause me to produce less baseball bats and more wood-based furniture. We used to have an old video store. There's an example here. We used to have an old video store in town, and the lady who ran that video store would sell a little bit of candy on the side, and she quickly realized that she was selling more popcorn and candy and sweets than she was making money renting videos. And so she quickly started selling less or renting less videos and selling more candy. So the supply of video rentals started to decrease because she was making so much money uh, selling candy, believe it or not. Government involvement. So, taxes and subsidies. Subsidies are the opposite of taxes. So a business might be something that the government really wants to see, probably not baseball bats, but like maybe I'm a producer of green energy. And maybe I produce, maybe my company makes windmills, those big, huge windmills that you see by the highways these days. And they really want to promote wind energy. And so I might have a tax break or even a subsidy coming from the government where the government's giving me free money, in which case that can affect the supply as well, increase the supply or decrease the supply. So just like with demand, we have to be careful with our terminology. Change in quantity supplied versus a change or a shift in supply. Change in quantity supplied is simply at a snapshot in time, any level of supply. If you raise the price, here's of course P over here on the left, is going to provide a quantity supplied of Q1, QS1. And if we find that the market prices have gone up, then as a business, I'm going to want to supply more goods and services to the market at this higher level of quantity supplied to. So that's just like any snapshot in time, price can change quantity supplied. Change in supply, however, is very similar to a change in demand. It's an entire shifting of that supply curve. And what gets confusing with supply, and not so much with demand, when demand curve increases, it shifts to the right, and it literally looks like an increase in supply because the arrow is pointed upward. It would be going this direction out to the right. A decrease in demand would be going toward this axis, toward the zero. So it looks like, visually, it looks like a decrease in demand. Supply is a little different because with supply, if we start at this S1 right here that I'm showing with my pointer, and I ask you to shift that supply curve so that it decreases, we'd actually be moving to S2. So the confusing part is it's going to the left, which if to the right on quantity is infinity out here, and to the left, the axis is zero, moving to the left does sound logical, that would be a decrease in supply. But when you decrease the supply curve, it has an upward and up to the left movement. So you see this arrow here is going to confuse you. And this is a trick question I have on most of my quizzes and tests from here on, is I'm going to ask you to identify the decrease in supply. Is S2 the decrease in supply, or is S3 the decrease in supply? And if you're just looking at arrows, you're going to get confused and you're going to say S3 is the decrease in supply, but you would be wrong. S3 is an increase in supply. And when we throw the demand curve in here in a few more slides, you're going to see that logically S3 as an increase and S2 as a decrease is going to change the equilibrium price in the correct direction. And so logically, you would think, for example, that a decrease in supply of anything, let's say the newest, hottest video game for you gamers out there, a decrease in supply, naturally, you're going to think that's going to increase the price. And when we happen, if I were to throw a random demand curve in here, and then I moved the supply curve from S1 to S2, it would indeed show a increase in price. And we'll come back to that as we throw supply and demand together, which is this slide right here. Just to reiterate, our P price axis always is our vertical axis. Q quantity, our horizontal axis. And for price, the decrease in price is going to always be downward to this point right here, which is 0. An increase in price is when the price goes upward. Increase in quantity is out to the right, and a decrease in quantity is to the left. So we're starting with just a random demand curve and a random supply curve. Wherever demand meets supply is what we call the equilibrium price. This is the kind of the going rate of whatever product or service that we're selling. So if you remember back to 2 weeks ago when I was in class lecturing, I had some Mountain Dews. And we had gotten, I had pulled one out at first and we'd auctioned. With one, there was only one supply of Mountain Dew. And the price, I was going to maximize the price. Now I have 3 sections of economics, and the maximum price in all 3 classes was different. And remember, to be part of demand, you have to be willing and able. And sometimes people were willing, but they weren't necessarily able. They didn't have the money in their pocket at that time. I was the producer supplying 1 can of Mountain Dew. And with that, the price of that Mountain Dew is going to be equal to that single Mountain Dew is going to be equal to the highest bidder. The one person, 1 can of Mountain Dew, 1 person, the highest bidder, that's going to be the equilibrium price. Then if you remember, I threw in some more Mountain Dews, and it was different for each class, but I think for 1 class, I increased it to 5 or 6 Mountain Dews the next go around. And the equilibrium is where all 5 supplied get purchased, get demanded at some price level, and that's going to be equilibrium price. A market clearing P1 and a market clearing Q1. So for example, in one of the classes, I don't remember which one, that ended up being like around $1. And so I had 5 Mountain Dews, and 5 students were willing to pay $1 or more for a Mountain Dew. And so the equilibrium price ends up being $1 in that case. So write down these 3. Now, these 3 are terms we're going to use it both in the everyday world and in economics, and they're the type of prices, and they're kind of related to each other. But we'll start off with the easiest one to understand. This the one on the bottom here, retail price. Retail price is simply what a store charges. So because stores can't necessarily change prices minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, they have to, in some cases, hire an economist, figure out what is going to be the best, and make a prediction. They're looking to look at statistics and models, make a prediction on what would be the best market clearing price for any product. So Walmart, for example, sells thousands and thousands of different products in their stores. And there is an economist somewhere in the Walmart headquarters in Arkansas that is trying to figure out across the country. And I could just pick any random good like brooms, for example. What price what exact price is the best price to maximize our profits and clear the most brooms sold that we supply? And so let's say they're going to, across the country, there's 10 million brooms is the supply of brooms at Walmart stores across the country. And so what price would it be? And again, they don't know necessarily, but what price would it be that would get rid of all 1 million brooms without any left over and without having a shortage? What's the perfect price? And so that's why when you walk into a Walmart, more than any other store, you're not going to see very many round numbers. Very rarely will you walk into a Walmart and you see a price and it's like $5 or $1. All right, usually it's like $1.29, or in the case of a broom, maybe, you know, 9.52, something like that, because they work it right down to the penny on what the retail price should be, and they're going to guess. Not nothing, it'll be an educated guess, but they're going to run some models and some statistics, and they're going to try and figure out what is the best price to clear all those brooms. The market price is really close to what we call equilibrium price. It's kind of the going rate. So let me jump up here to equilibrium price. Equilibrium price is what we just looked at. It's like an unseen moving target according to supply and demand. And so the best way to explain this is with my three econ classes in the Mountain Dew. Equilibrium price, it's unseen, it's a moving target. It depends totally on the exact supply and the exact demand at any given moment. As soon as somebody purchases a Mountain Dew, they drop out of the demand, so the demand goes down. Or when a Mountain Dew is purchased, it drops out of the supply, so the supply goes down. And then as more are being manufactured and brought to the market, the supply goes up. And so equilibrium price is just this kind of unseen moving target. In all three of my economics classes, when I did the Mountain Dew simulation, I had no idea what the equilibrium prices were going to be. We had to actually do it. I had to kind of run an auction in order to figure out what the equilibrium price was going to be in any one of my classes. And then moment by moment, it changes. People change their mind. Maybe they want to buy a Mountain Dew now, 10 seconds from now, they don't want to buy a Mountain Dew. So it's very hard to peg equilibrium price. So on the step toward creating a retail price, there are these things called market prices. And market prices are very close to equilibrium. It's kind of the going rate. And so it's something that might change on maybe a day-to-day basis. It's kind of neat when you see if you go to a fresh fish restaurant in the big city, and you look at the menu and it might say, trout is $9.95 for a dish, and maybe cod is $15 for a dish, and then it might say Alaskan crab. And then you would see, rather than a price on the menu, you'd see market price, just the term market price. If you go to Fred's restaurant, you also would see that for their prime rib. And the reason why they do that is because they can't just pick one price. They can't pick a retail price, because the prices of beef and prime rib, excuse me, fish, these things are constantly changing due to supply and demand. They're very sensitive to supply and demand. And so one week you might go into Fred's for a prime rib, and you might pay $19.99 for a prime rib, and the next day it might be $23.99 for a prime rib. So that's the market price. Equilibrium price is kind of this unseen, constantly moving target. Market price is like maybe taking a photo, a snapshot in time, and figuring out what is that price at this very moment would be a market price. And then a retail price is more rigid. It's for a longer period of time, which means that it's probably has an opportunity to be less accurate, either too high or too low. So speaking of too high or too low, what happens when a retailer sets the price too high? So unbeknownst to the retailer, they take a random good and they set a price, and we're going to call that price P1 over here. And excuse me, I have this backwards. They set a price and they set their price as P2. All right. And little do they know, because remember, we really, at any given day or any given week at a store, you don't know what's happening. They don't know what's happening to demand for those goods. Maybe, for example, something becomes very popular, or an emergency happens and people make a rush to buy gasoline, in which case the demand starts increasing, causing the equilibrium price to go high, but they set the price too low, and it caused a shortage. We've seen that in Houghton Lake at the gas station fairly over the last couple of years. But in my situation here on this one, um, store sets the price too high. And this random P2 is our price being too high. And unbeknownst to them, the equilibrium is actually down here at P1. I don't have any numbers to put on here just at the moment, but what happens is at P2, suppliers are saying, that's a great price. We're going to supply as much as we possibly can out to this amount here. Demanders, customers are going to say that price is too high. I'm not going to demand. And so what you have is you have a demand level here, Q2, and you have a supply level here, Q3, and it causes this gap, which we call a surplus of goods. It's the unsold portion. There's more supply than there is demand. I don't know what this gap represents yet, but if we were to switch to the next slide here, we're going to switch to the next slide, you would see what normally happens when a store has too much supply of something. If there's a surplus, they accidentally set the price too high. Supply will be high, demand will be low, and this is where Adam Smith's invisible hand theory comes into play. You would say to yourself, hey, the price is too high. The consumers don't like that. And so one option might be involve the government. Let's get the government to force them to lower the price. Well, that would be the wrong option, because according to Adam Smith, when we get the government involved with prices, they're always going to make a mistake. They can't hit that moving target. It's constantly moving target. So Adam Smith's invisible hand theory basically said, government stay out of the market, hands off, laissez-faire. And if you do that, then stores will naturally, on their own, they're going to act greedy. They don't want to lose money. They don't want to have excess supply laying around their store unsold. That loses them money. And buyers aren't going to buy it. If the price is too high, the buyers just aren't going to buy it, and they're going to let it sit at the store. And then they start having sales, and they lower the price. And so as the store starts to lower the price down to market equilibrium, supply gets scaled back, demand increases, and you end up finding what the market equilibrium or the market clearing price is when supply meets demand. You don't have any excess, surplus, they call that, and you don't have a shortage. That's going to be on the other side. And there used to be a toy. My oldest son was asking if you ever heard of the Barney and Friends kids show. There was a Barney dinosaur. Here's Barney the dinosaur's face here. And this was the Barney banjo. The Barney banjo was a toy that had one of those little laser lights. And all you had to do is the laser light was in this hole area, and you'd have to stick your hand in this hole and it would play all kinds of music. And true story, when my oldest son, who is now 25, when he was about 5 or 6 years old, a fan of Barney the dinosaur, he had asked for Christmas this Barney the dinosaur banjo. And what ended up happening that particular year, and every year there's these hot Christmas items and Christmas toys, the Tickle Me Elmo and some other various popular Christmas toys every year. And the market equilibrium price for the Barney banjo was right around $20. But the stores didn't know that. They didn't realize that demand was high enough for them to sell all the produced Barney banjos for about $20. So let's pretend that P1 is $20. And at $20, let's say that 1,000 of these Q1, 1,000 of these would be sold at $20. Well, what they did, and it wasn't by much, all right, P1, the actual retail, excuse me, P2, the actual retail price, which they thought was going to be close to equilibrium, they set the price of the Barney Banjo at around $17. And so at $17, what you ended up having is this much Q2 being supplied. You had a huge number, Q3 being demanded, and you had this same gap like we had in our other slide, but this gap now represents a shortage. Demand, here's the demand curve. Demand is way out here at Q3. Supply is way out here at about Q2. So if I was going to call Q1 1,000 Barney banjos, all right, we could call all these notifications going off here. We could call, don't do that. We could call this level Q3 maybe 1,500. And this level here, Q2, maybe about 500. So Q2 would be 500, Q1 would be 1,000, Q3 would be about 1,500. And so this caused this gap between 500 and 1,500, which is 1,000 Barney banjo shortage. All right, way more demanded than we're actually hitting the market. And when you get something like that, and by the way, about 25 years ago was the infancy of the website eBay, the auction website eBay. And so my wife and I, we kept going to Walmart and checking for the Barney banjo, and they were out. I never had any Barney banjos. And so we kept checking, week by week as Christmas was approaching, and there was always no Barney banjos. And so I checked eBay, and on eBay they were selling for about $20 a banjo. And so that was telling me the market clearing price. What's going on is a black market. Quite often, if you have inequities in a market, surpluses and shortages, then the black market will fix that. The black market will get rid of those shortages and surpluses. So in the case of this shortage, everybody who was willing to pay $20 was able to get one. All right. And if you weren't able to pay the $20 or didn't want to pay the $20, you were this gap of people. And that's where my wife and I, we were in this gap right here between people willing to pay $20 and people willing to pay $17. And that was the excess shortage that was created there. So supply, demand, and equilibrium together. And we call these problems with that disequilibrium. When disequilibrium occurs, the invisible hand or a black market comes in and puts pressure on the market to stabilize at the equilibrium. We don't know what that number always is. We don't know what that equilibrium level is, but we know that the market will stabilize at that amount because people will find that they can't sell items. If you try and, it's just really simple. It's logical. You guys have maybe done this before. Maybe you're trying to sell something that you're ready to put on Craigslist or eBay. And if you set the price too high, you don't find any buyers. So if you really want to sell it, what do you have to do? You have to lower the price. All right. And that's not you being a nice person. It's you being greedy to yourself. And this is why Adam Smith, who believed in the invisible hand theory and how it works, is that if you just let everybody go, the prices will always find that equilibrium. Assuming people don't want to get stuck with goods. Now, on the other hand, as well, if I have Mountain Dews to sell, and let's say my name is Drew Jaskowski, and they call me Mountain Drew. And I know that I can sell Mountain Dews for a buck a piece out of my locker in the hallways of Roscommon High School. But I can buy those by the 12 pack at about 50 cents a can. There's going to be enough demand for me to do that. And if he sells out at $1, if he brings 12 cans in, he sells every one of them by first block. What is Drew going to do? All right. And we know what Drew is going to do. He's going to sell them for $1.50 tomorrow. And if he sells them all by the end of the day at $1.50, what might he do the third day? He might try and sell them for $1.75. Well, at some point he's going to hit that market equilibrium price. He's going to know that 12 Mountain Dews, I can sell all 12 Mountain Dews on any given day for, let's say, $1.55. All right, he probably isn't going to do that, but then he could sell them all at $1.50. That's his market equilibrium price. He tries to raise the price too high, he's going to have leftover Mountain Dews. He's going to need to store them in his locker. He doesn't like that. He sets the price too low. He's not maximum. He's going to sell them out really quick. There'll be a shortage. He's not going to maximize his profits. And so the next day he's going to raise his prices. This is the invisible hand theory working like it should work. So that's all we're going to cover today. We're going to go into these government controls called price ceilings and price floors next time around. So I may or may not be ending class a little bit early today, but we'll be done at this point. So take care, everybody. And hey, by the way, because I've been on some bereavement leave, I've got a stack of papers and Google Classroom work turned in that I haven't gotten to yet. So just be patient with me. If you see some grades or some assignments you think you turned in, but they're not showing up on Skyward yet, just keep checking. I'm plugging through all that stuff as I can get through it. And if you want to shoot me an email and just double check, that's fine too. I don't mind, but just know that there is a stack of papers that I haven't gone through fully yet, and when we'll get there. All right, take care, everybody.